I would like to announce the next lecture. Those of you who were with us in the Labour Museum last night heard that they already proudly announced that they were doing a project on flexicurity, which has been nationalized as something we are proud of because it seems that people appreciate it. Being in a field which relates to learning and work, we thought it would be very productive to look into the wider socioeconomic and institutional framework of work, and so we invited a Danish economist who has been prominent in discussion about Danish labor market policy and in labor market analysis, and it's also its consequences for learning. So he will speak about flexicurity and lifelong learning with the hopeful subtitle, A Road to Protected Mobility. Kongshoej Madsen, standing beside me, is a professor at Aalborg University, which is, so to say, the sister university of Roskilde, also a relatively new interdisciplinary university. I look very much forward to hear your talk, Per, and thank you for coming.
Well, thank you, Henning, and thank you for inviting me to talk to all of you on my, well, I must say my favorite subjects. So thanks to all of you for coming here. And what I will do is to talk about flexicurity in general, but also have some discussion about lifelong learning from this perspective. I use the term protected mobility in my subtitle because this idea about having mobility as a good thing, but something which has to be protected to work in a reasonable fashion, that's one of the hallmarks of flexicurity. I am from the Center for Labor Market Research, which is called KAMA. It makes no sense to an English-speaking person, but in Danish it comes out nicely. And also, of course, there's some connotations to it. And this is, most of us up there, we are about 20 persons. As you can see, we are quite a mixed bag by sex and by age. We also a mixed bag by disciplines. I'm an economist, but we also have sociologists and economists, political scientists at the center. As I said, around 20 people, and our topics are listed here: wage formation, industrial relations, etc., etc. And then we have also, in recent years, specialized, some of us at least, in what's called flexicurity research, and I've just taken the cover of our latest book on the subject, which is called Flexicurity and Beyond. It was out about a year and a half ago. I'm here to welcome you. I mean, I'm sure you had many welcomes when you came to Denmark. I'm going to welcome you to the homeland of flexicurity. This is a cover of a book which was published in 2006, and you can see there the Danish flag, the blue sky, and it's about the Danish experience. But what was on the back of the book, on the back cover, it said that Denmark has outperformed most other advanced capitalist countries since the mid-1980s. Danes are modest people. This was not written by a Dane, but I use it mainly to tell you, or give you an impression about the hype which we found about Denmark, at least have found about Denmark in recent years. What I will do is to give you a few statistical facts about the Danish economy and the Danish labor market in a comparative perspective. And then, well, I'm always doubtful when I talk to an audience these days, because sometimes I get the feeling that the only people who have not heard about flexicurity must be living happily somewhere on an island in the South Pacific. I mean, when you have been working on the subject for many years, you think that everybody should know about it, but still I find that some people, a good many people out there, don't know what I here call the basics of flexicurity. So therefore, for those of you, I have a sequence on that, and those who are already very familiar with flexicurity can relax and think about the folks back home or the program of the conference or whatever. Then I'll say a bit about lifelong learning in the Danish model, and then I'll talk about the European perspective, flexicurity, lifelong learning, and the Lisbon strategy. It should all be over by 1:15, I'm the last barrier between you and lunch, I know, and I will take that seriously. So let's have a go at it. First of all, the usual slide about unemployment. You can see that until 1993, the Danish rate of unemployment was about the same level as the European average for EU 15. But then the Danes took the low way while the rest of Europe still stayed on the high way, and now we are around half of the European level. This slide, these curves, sometimes make people believe that something wonderful happened in Denmark in 1993, and then we kept it a secret for about 10 years, and then we started exporting it. This version of the story is too brief, and I will try to tell you more about the institutions which are, have a long historic background in Denmark and which are part of the so-called Danish model of flexicurity. I just here taking the last unemployment rates. As you can see, Denmark is now number 4 in the European rank, and we are creeping upwards. So maybe 3 or 4 years from now, the Danish labor market will not be as much as a miracle as it has been in recent years. But you can see there's still quite a distance to Spain at the other end of the range with an unemployment which is about 1 in 5. Still, if you take job creation, and by job creation I simply mean the share of the adult population which is working, which is employed at the labor market, Denmark is in the top end of the European League. Well, actually Denmark is number 1. I've taken Switzerland in here too, but the Swiss are not members of the European Union and therefore not in this particular context. So in the EU contest of having the highest employment rate, Denmark is number 1. I have the number of countries there. I won't comment on them, but just say that if you take the 70% mark, it has for a number of years been the main quantitative target of the Lisbon strategy, that in 2010 the European Union should have an average employment rate of 70%. Now, we have known for a few years that this will not be. If you take EU average, it's down now to around 66, and that it would take some sort of miracle to put it to 70 in 2010. We have been wondering why, what sort of explanation would they be giving for not reaching the 70% target in 2010? Well, now we know it's a crisis, the crisis originating from the financial markets, which will make this impossible. So it's not the fault of the European politicians, and that can make them sleep better than they would have if it had been there, if they could have been accused of not having been able to reach the 70% target in 2010. Then I have this slide which is about international competitiveness. This just to show you that well, sometimes I meet foreigners who say that it's all very good about Denmark and all this employment, but the trick they use is to put everybody in the public sector where they take good care of one another. And that creates lots of employment, but not a real economy. Well, take this one, which is about international competitiveness. It's just one example out of a number where Denmark consistently ends up in the top 5 of these international rankings. This is my favorite, of course, because it puts Denmark as number 1 and has done that for 3 years in a row. It's from the UK journal, The Economist, which is not, I can tell you, a social democratic cover operation. It's a conservative liberal journal, but still, when they rank countries according to their competitiveness, Denmark comes out as number 1. Not because we are cheap, of course, because we have a high wage level, high tax level, etc., but because we have some other things which are important, a high level of education, we have a peaceful labor market, etc., etc. And maybe you remember the nice book cover from a few minutes ago with the Danish flag and the blue sky, etc. If you look at the subtitle of that book, it was called Varieties of Capitalism. And the main message from this literature on the varieties of capitalism is that many, at least some different forms of capitalism can all be competitive at the same time, but of course for different reasons. So if you want cheap labor, don't go to Denmark, but if you want qualified labor, peaceful labor market, high skills, etc., you can have Denmark or Finland or some of the other countries here. Now I come to the part which was about the basics of flexicurity. And well, if you take the first bullet there, it just says that that flexibility and security are not contradictions, but can be mutually supportive. Now, this does not sound as something which should lead a country or scientist into some sort of fame. It sounds wonderfully simple to say that the two elements can support one another. But still, if you look at a lot of common sense, you will find that you often think that if you are inflexible, you are secure. I mean, many of you came here by airplane, I guess, and there you were sitting in your seat, fasten your seat belts, and there you were feeling hopefully safe, and you were safe because you were inflexible. So rather often we tend to associate inflexibility and security with one another. One way to present flexicurity is to say that it can also be the other way around. For instance, if you're stuck in a burning car, it's rather nice to be flexible and hope that your seat belt will not prevent you from getting out of there. If you take mainstream economic theory, it's the same, but of course put a bit more sophisticated, because many times when a mainstream economist sees a safety net, could be unemployment benefits, could be social security, the economist will tend to say, well, there's a safety net. I think it can easily turn into a hammock. It can turn into disincentives, implying that people will not feel have the urge to move out of that situation. So also, if you take mainstream economic theory, you will always often find that safety nets are looked upon with a good deal of suspicion. In the middle, I just noted that sometimes people are so kind to think that flexicurity was invented by an ingenious Dane or by the Danish society in some magic fashion. Well, the truth is that the term flexicurity stems from the Netherlands, from the mid-1990s, and from a rather specific political situation where they were discussing how to make the part of the labor market which was for substitutes more safe, while at the same time making the labor market for workers with a permanent contract more flexible. So it was a very specific Dutch situation, but then at the time somebody labeled that piece of legislation the law on flexibility and security, or flexicurity. And then it traveled around in the academic world. Professor Thorn Wilthagen from Tilburg University, who is really sort of the Mr. Flexicurity in Europe. I got a nice photo of him there. He's a sociologist, by the way. But he gave it academic content. And what I'm going to present to you is now a bit about the way in which Thorn developed these ideas. Well, this is just, I forgot to show you that before. This is just to illustrate the point that if you look at this person who is, well, seems to be a white-collar worker, who's making a transition on the labor market and has to cross this rather hard and wet place which is below him. I mean, the question which a flexicuritarian will ask is whether it would be easier to persuade this person to make this transition with or without a safety net. Well, don't think twice, because the answer is obvious, that safety nets, and this is a main message from flexicurity theory, safety nets can promote transitions and will not always hamper transitions. This point was made actually by the Danish Prime Minister, or rather the former Danish Prime Minister, in 2004, where he gave a speech to his party, the Danish Liberal Party, and he talked about the Danish labor market and said that we have a higher level of flexibility here, and we have this because we also have a high level of social security, high benefit levels, and high cash benefits also. So, I mean, somehow he had actually grasped the idea of the positive interplay between flexibility and security. And what happened then was that he told the audience in 2004 that he had been at an EU summit the other day telling about this, and this was in English, of course, as it always is in the European Union, or often is at least. And then he combined the two words and said that we have flexibility and security, and then I called the Danish model flexicurity. Now I love this quote, of course, because it tells you a lot, very much about the way in which flexicurity has been sort of internalized in the mind, not only of social scientists in Denmark, but also in the minds of politicians and civil servants, etc. He continued actually that this is good because in French it's called flexicurity. There's a small footnote there because actually in France they tend to call it flexicurity. I mean, they like the security part a lot, and I'll come back to that in a moment. What happened then in Denmark from 2004 and onwards is that suddenly the word spread around, that the flexicurity was mentioned more and more often in Danish media. Before 2004, very few Danes, maybe 10 or 15, knew that we were living in a flexicurity country. But then it took on, and as you can see, it's now become a phrase which is commonly used. There's a small point here again, because nothing changed in Denmark in 2004. It was still the good old Denmark as it was in 2003, when we looked at it in 2006 and 2007. But suddenly we started talking about Denmark in a different way. And this is a nice example of a discourse, where suddenly pops up a new way of looking at old things, so to say. And what I will do later on is to show you a bit about my argument that what are sort of the foundation of flexicurity in a Danish context. If you take research, you can see that there it has also been a growing business. The number of references to flexicurity here taken from Google Scholar have been rising rapidly, not from 2004, but actually back from 1998, where Thorn Wilthagen made his first contribution on the subject. So it's probably also a rather rare example of an academic venture which suddenly turns into politics. And at least for I think it happens not very often for social scientists that a concept with which they have been working suddenly sort of explodes in their face and becomes not world famous maybe, but at least plays a role in politics. What are the basics then? Well, I have already in my subtitle said that the basics is about protected mobility. It's about giving that guy on the tight rope that you saw before, giving him a safety net, making him more motivated, more able to make a transition over a cold and hard place. So what we say in the flexicurity community is that you should protect mobility, you should not protect jobs. And this is of course then one of the reasons why flexicurity is not only about the labor market, because the second idea, or second important idea, is that if you have a more flexible, secure labor market, you can also have a more higher level of what we call institutional competitiveness. You would have a labor market which is more dynamic, where people move faster from sunset to sunrise, and therefore a more competitive economy. And this is where the link is established later on to the Lisbon strategy. What I will do now is to show you the two, what I call here, icons of flexicurity. And one is named after Thorn Wilthagen, whose portrait you saw before, and the other one is called the Danish Golden Triangle. And the reason I want to do this is to illustrate to you that there is more to flexicurity than this country which you're visiting right now. It's a broader agenda, although flexicurity is very often, maybe too often, associated solely with the Danish model. So let's have a look. This is the Wilthagen Matrix. And what Thorn did, I have quoted it here from 2004, but actually this was in his first article from 1998. What Thorn did was to combine on the vertical axis, well, here they just listed a number of, at the time, rather well-known concepts from labor market economics, which was concepts that all related to the approaches which a company could have if there was a change in the demand for its production. So if you are a personnel director or a businessman and you see that the demand for your products are increasing or decreasing, well, what can you do? Well, first of all, of course, you can hire and fire, and that's what is called numerical flexibility. Or you can try to apply functional flexibility, which is to say, okay, if that product line is going down, move the people to another product line which is still in demand. So it's moving between tasks. Then you can apply working time flexibility, of course, overtime work or part-time work, shorter hours, also to adapt your labor input to the demand, the need for labor. And finally, you can try to apply wage flexibility, which is, well, it's in the term, to either pay more to attract more workers or to pay less, and argue that we can't afford the high wages that you're getting now. All standard stuff. Then we have on the horizontal axis the new things which are added by Tone, which is first of all to say that security comes in different shapes and colors, so to say. You can have job security, which is about being secure in the job you have already, or you can have income security, which is getting unemployment benefits if you lose your jobs. Then you can have employment security, which is sometimes called the security of the wings, lovely term, which is about having competences that can allow you to get another job if you use the one you have, but also, of course, the luck of being on the labor market where there's some demand for labor. So it's both a micro concept about your ability to get a new job, employability as it's called sometimes, and it's also about being in a good place, being in the labor market where you actually have job openings around. Then finally, combination security, which is about work-life balance, combining working life and the family, civil society out there. One way to apply then the Wilthagen Matrix is to open the agenda for a number of different policy discussions which are set to combine some sort of security and some sort of flexibility. This is from a publication from the European Union where they try to illustrate to workers, to trade unions, and to employers' organizations that there are a number of potential sort of win-win bargains out there. And you can see I've just, for the occasion, included or marked, highlighted that, of course, training and lifelong learning can be part of those strategies. If you want your lunch at time, I will not go through all this. This is just to illustrate that there are a number of, this opens up for sort of a policy discussion between the social partners. But another application of the Wilthagen Matrix is to, as I said here, put countries into boxes. And here we approach the Danish story because, as the Prime Minister said, as I showed him say a few minutes ago, Denmark has numerical flexibility, flexible labor market, and then we have income security. And then he didn't say that, but since the 1990s, Denmark have also added a rather strong component of active labor market policy, which is aimed at giving employment security. So Denmark, 2 boxes for Denmark. Germany, lots of job security. You can't dismiss a German. And then German employers will have to apply functional flexibility instead. Now, a word of warning. You should not, of course, confuse the country in the box with the country in reality. I mean, these are sort of ideal types, illustrations. And you can dismiss a German. Of course you can. And also, in Denmark, we have, of course, all kinds of security, all kinds of flexibility. So, when I say, when Denmark has become sort of world famous for being in those 2 boxes, it's not because it's only in the boxes, but maybe there's something about Denmark being more in the boxes where I've shown to you than people might think. First of all, flexibility. If you look at job tenure, which is one measure of flexibility, it tells you about how many years the average person has been with a specific employer. You can see that on the one hand here we have Greece, 14 years. They stay where they are in Greece. And then you have United Kingdom on the other end with 8 years. So there's a rather wide dispersion between countries here. And then the point is that you find Denmark in this illustration, in this statistic, you find Denmark next to Ireland and United Kingdom. So we are sort of in the fast end of the labor markets, which are shown here. You have Finland and Sweden, which are somewhat higher. So this tells you that there could be something about the Danes at least being more flexible on the labor market than our Nordic brothers and sisters. Here's another illustration of the same point that we have here. Again, Greece, if you measure job tenure, this is from a different study. Greece on one end, and then we have the new member states on the other, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia. And why? Because they have undergone rapid restructuring in recent years. So I mean, having been with an employer in Latvia or Estonia for more than a few years, that's pretty rare because that employer wasn't there a few years ago. But then again, we find Denmark, among the old member states, we find Denmark and United Kingdom next to one another. Why can this be? Why is it so that Danes seem to be surprisingly restless on the labor market? Well, it could be a matter of culture, but also it could be simply because Danes actually live a rather unprotected life when it comes to the labor market. I mean, we are usually associated as being a Nordic welfare state. Danes are protected from cradle to grave, etc., etc. But actually, if you look at the rules on the labor market, the protection level of an ordinary employee in Denmark, we are pretty easy to dismiss. And the reason I can argue this is because the OECD has for a number of years made this index of the protection of ordinary employees, and we find, well, United States, that's the Wild West, of course, but then you have the UK, and then comes Denmark and Ireland. So we have about as liberal labor market as they have in the UK, which is, as you know, pretty liberal. Where do we find our Nordic brothers and sisters? Well, Sweden, next to the Netherlands, and next to Portugal. So there is some dispersion here again between the European countries. Does this make a difference? Well, here the European Commission have made a graph in their publication on flexicurity from the fall of 2006. And as you can see, there's something to it, that in the countries which have the high level of what's called EPL strictness, and that's a high level of employment protection legislation. And on the one axis, the horizontal axis, and then you have on the vertical axis, you have the average tenure. There's something to it. In the countries with a high level of protection, you have the highest tenure, and vice versa. Then you would think, and this is an important point, you would think that in the countries with a high level of protection, you would find the workers which feel most safe. I mean, you can't dismiss me, they will say to their employer, and they would feel pretty safe. But what do we see? This again shows on the horizontal axis EPL strictness, employment protection, and then on the vertical axis you have one indicator of how secure do you feel on the labor market. And what do you see? That the more employment protection, the less feeling of security, and the less employment protection, the higher sense of security. And then here comes the animation. Oops, that's the other way around. Whoopty, boopty. I mean, don't we have a political message here? If you reduce employment protection, you get happier workers. And this is exactly the sort of message which the Commission want to put across in this analysis. Apart from being happy, you have, of course, the issue of the benefits you have. I can't go into details, but if you look at benefit levels, there's again a lot of discussion about how to measure this, but one observation here is that in Denmark we have what seems to be the most generous benefit level that you find in the OECD area. Many Danes will argue, if you talk to them over lunch, that it's not as good as it has been before. That's true, but in a comparative perspective, it's still rather high, the benefit level, especially if you take the lower income ranges. Finally, a bit about employment security, at least the kind of employment security which is provided from active labor market policy. And here we have Denmark as the highest spending country, I think in the universe, not universe maybe, but the world, because we are simply the country which spends most money, both on active and passive measures, and also if you take active measures, the red bar, we have the highest level. If you take passive measures, the green bar, we have the highest level. We are big spenders in this area. And this leads to what's here called the Danish flexicurity model, and which is then sort of another way of putting Denmark in a specific box in the Wilthagen Matrix. This is the official version from the European employment in Europe 2006, and this is a more colorful one, which is made by myself, the Danish so-called golden triangle, and you have seen most of it before. It's about a flexible labor market. About 30% of Danes move between jobs every year. It's about a rather generous unemployment benefit, insurance or cash benefits, and about 20% of Danes actually receive unemployment benefits during a year. And it's about active labor market policy, and about 10% of all Danes take part in one or another kind of active program during a year. And then I've added, and this is just not for your benefit, I've added that there's more to the more to employment security in Denmark than just active labor market policy, education policy, and more. I'll return to that. I just added, as you said, the arrows, the white arrows, just are to illustrate flows of people. And then I've added two more points here. It's about the effects of labor market policy, and here I've just noted that there are, of course, two effects of these policy measures in Denmark. One is the qualification effect, that you